Okay.
Welcome Wargamers, this is Doug with 2+ Stuff, and today we're going to be diving into the Kharadron Overlords. This has been an extremely highly requested video that I'm finally getting to after all this time, and if you have something that you would like requested, go ahead and click subscribe, leave it in the comments down below. Now, like all of our lore videos, we're going to start off with some basic facts and then move into a really great discussion on what makes this army fascinating from a narrative perspective. So the story behind the Kharadron Overlords really begins in the Age of Chaos. As many of these factions do. The Duarden and all their different various forms were kind of smashed as a people, spread out and splintered. That's where you have the dispossessed kind of marauding everywhere. You have the fire slayers who retreated their forges and kind of became nomadic. And then you have these Duarden who were cave and mine dwellers within mountains. They kind of found a unique way to retreat from the chaos going on. That was they actually took to the skies. They became engineers and manufacturers of great flying ships and literally just flew above the chaos going down below them. They developed an entire society isolated from the mortal realms during the Age of Chaos, and when the Age of Sigmar began, where our story takes place now, they saw an opportunity for power, glory, and profit, and so they returned again. So there are three really main, I guess, subtopics that really make up this army in a fascinating sense. The first one is the Code, the second one is Ether Gold, and the third is going to be, we're going to talk about the overall Overlord temperament, what the people are like. And from those kind of three base concepts, we're going to get a great idea of what this army is all about. Okay, so what is the Code and how does it define the Kharadron Overlord worldview? Well, here's the thing. A bunch of these Duarden, when they took to the skies, they did it for profit. I mean, originally you developed technologies for money and things like that, and they were miners and harvesters and moving resources, and then obviously those enterprise ships needed to be used for survival. But when there's danger is kind of subsided, people need to figure out how business and life work together in those kinds of situations. So they created what is called the Code. This is the overarching law and moral system of the Kharadron Overlords. It dictates all aspects of the Kharadron Overlord culture and society. During the mass exodus from their ground keeps, there was pandemonium and competition and kind of dissolution, and basically all these separate entities were almost like independent ships on almost like rafts, right? Imagine if Titanic sinks and there's 1,000 life ships in the water, and then you started roping those all together and you made kind of one uber life ship, right? How does that new little micro society function? That's what the Code is saying. When all those disparate parts came together, they had what's called the Conference of Madralta. Okay, this is where the Code was born. It's basically every captain of these ships coming saying, this is how I mandate my crew live. And we all kind of compiled our rules together. We made one uber set of rules for society about how we're going to get through this. Now what's interesting is this, because I said earlier they developed completely independent of the mortal realms, right? That the trajectory that we've had as far as a timeline for everyone else is totally different for these guys. They have an overarching concept behind them, is that they didn't believe Sigmar, Grugni, or Grimnir, their gods, were going to help them. Okay, so this is kind of like the best parts of culture coming together, being like, hey, nobody else is going to help us, so let's get it together. And so that's why the Code was born. It was out of necessity, but it's evolved into this entire worldview building regiment. It's important to know that the Code, which started as a set of rules for ships, has evolved, and it fully governs society, how businesses work, how ships and crews conduct themselves, their judicial system, how they travel, everything. And there's also a few cool notes about the Code, is that it can be interpreted. Much like we have lawyers who interpret the laws different ways, in our day's society, there's a lot of wiggle room within the Code for people to get away with things. And lastly, the thing I want to talk about the Code is that not every Kharadron Overlord follows it. If we're at a spectrum, right, where some are law-abiding citizens and some are pirates, there's people all over that spectrum, and some of the giant, clans, I want to say, for the Kharadron Overlords definitely lean towards the piracy side, where there's more guidelines than rules. So it is important to note that they do have this very regimented worldview that's taken them, from chaos, literally the chaos of what's going on, and survived them for hundreds of years. And so now I want to move into talking about Ether Gold. Now the reason I want to talk about this specifically, and it's not a very long section, it is the resource that makes their society possible. okay? It is when you see those models that have the big round sphere and they're kind of like lifting the Kharadron Overlord up, that thing is actually full of ether gold. Basically, in its natural state, it is gaseous and it can be found in the clouds, much like you would find ore in rock when you're mining. If you fly through a cloud, you'll find patches of ether gold, right? When you condense it, right, kind of like purify it and like put pressure on it, it actually turns to a solid form. So it's a really cool physics idea that like it's either in a solid or gaseous form, much like how dry ice doesn't actually melt, it just dissipates. You know, it has solid gas, but there's no point in which it's water in between. Really, really fascinating. Now, being in a cloud means obviously high elevation. Could very well likely mean storms. Point is, the book gets across that it's very, very dangerous to mine this stuff. And the other thing I want to mention is that their entire society, the goal of the whole thing is to get more and more of this stuff. They have flying cities, literally every ship, the entire thing, the infrastructure of their entire lifestyle is built upon everything staying in the sky, which this is the only resource they have to make that happen. So, getting this stuff is paramount, right? It is the commodity in which they all trade. It's the thing that their government is built on. Government's in quotes there because the code is really the government. So, you know what I mean? Like, it's the motivation for everything. If you're looking for a motivator for a game, it's a great one to do. Just keep that in mind. Now, here's the thing. These conditions, right? The code, having to work together because you don't think there's any gods coming to help you, and then your entire society being built upon one naturally occurring resource, these conditions make a certain kind of person. You understand what I'm saying? Fundamentally, there's about 3 things that make up any given Kharadron Overlord, okay? The code, survival, meaning getting ether gold, and also profit. Now, why do I bring profit into this? Well, here's the thing. Like I said before, these frigates and airships with that, you know, were originally created as a commercial class, and so the people who owned those were the ones who were like business keepers and things like that. And so as this society evolved around business and everyone sending out ships to get a resource and harvesting things, and like, you know, it kind of made this entire society of big businesses. Obviously, the commodity they're trading is ether gold to keep the cities afloat, and people work in servitude to get more ether gold and get ships and build more ships and things like that. And so it is fascinating that this really is a conglomeration of massive enterprises. So profit is at the core of that. Now, of course, they have an emphasis on science and technology. They are super, pushy against magic and the mysterious things. They're very like rational thinking. Most things can be explained away. They're not really odd, I suppose is a good way to say it. And I know a lot of people were worried when they kind of came out with Fire Slayers, who they kind of described them as being almost mercenary-esque. They're like, oh, well, the honor code of the old school dwarves are gone. And they didn't disappear from the Fire Slayers, it's just a different kind, right? And that's actually the same thing they did with the Kharadron Overlords. First and foremost, they are honorable people. They will give you their word and they will keep it. The thing is, they are also ruthless and shrewd business people and will look for any kind of loopholes or misinterpretations or, you know what I mean, like semantics to change what their word was to get out of something. That being said, if they say they're going to, assist with it, they still have this honor code system, so they're going to do what they said they did. It just may not look quite like what you thought it was going to look like. It's a very unusual kind of honor. I want to stress that. And the last little thing I want to put about kind of the temperament of a Kharadron Overlord, as a society, they're thriving. Okay, that they're making profits since Age of Sigmar started, right? There's wars being fought, there's good guys to sell things to who are not going to kill you just for showing up. There's all kinds of activity happening, and the Kharadron Overlords are reaping all of the benefits of that. Okay, so that is the kind of general ideas about the Kharadron Overlords. There are some historical incidents they've had where they fought other people. Obviously, I'm not going to go ship by ship and describe every single one. But I think I hit on the main things, right? Their worldview is based upon their need for ether gold, the code, obviously, and then talk a little bit some facts about what kind of people this makes. And so what I want to stop and do right now is talk about why this faction is incredibly unique. I didn't actually think it was going to be as unique as it was, right? I thought I was going to pick up this book and be like, yeah, they seem pretty cool, right? They're sky dwarves, they're techie, it's cool. But actually, I loved it. It was actually such a fascinating thing. I really got my juices flowing in my brain here. What makes these guys primarily interesting, I think, first of all, is that they're singularly so far the only faction that does not care at all about the gods. This makes them incredibly unique. I've discussed in just about all my other lore videos, Age of Sigmar is much more of like a pantheon type thing, where there's gods fighting all the time, and they're very active in the followers' worlds and things like that. But then you have this race over here who kind of shrugged them off a long time ago. They came at the world with the approach that like there's no gods gonna help us, right? Their deity, who would probably be either Grungy or Grimnir, the two Dwarden gods, offered them no support when things got rough. They turned their backs on each other, and so they have grown up independently in this world of pantheon of gods, being godless, but choosing to be. Not like Slanesh, where their god's missing, but choosing that lifestyle makes them super unique. Now, following that, right, not only is that worldview of religion and things like that, but that they're also governed by themselves, not by a deity, right? All the Sigmarines, I'm getting in trouble for that saying that, but all the Stormcast Eternals, they all answer to Sigmar. Everything in their world has Sigmar in the title of it somewhere. They all answer to him. If he says something, they'll all bow knee. The Chaos Gods and their little demon followers, they're a part of the greater god, so they can't really argue with him whatsoever. Things like that. The followers of Nagash may not like Nagash whatsoever, but they're kind of like under duress, right? They're subjugated to him. But the Kharadron Overlords self-govern, which is so unique. There's no one else so far than the Battletome that is so autonomous from any sort of deity, but not only that, but is a functional society enough to govern itself and move in a certain direction by the will of the quote-unquote people. I love their emphasis on technology rather than, say, magical artifacts, because like you'll have the Stormcast Eternals and Sigmar be like, I think there was a magical artifact there, and that they'll send down a chamber and like, we're looking for the magical amulet of Thune and whatever like that, trying to find some ancient artifact. And the Kharadron Overlords like, no, if there was something like that, I'm sure we can replicate it, and they'll build like a magical steam gun that does the same thing, right? Because they build it. They don't look for things. It's not about relics. It's about technology moving forward. And that's totally a different mindset. Picking up the pieces of the old world through artifacts versus forging a new world through technology. Another awesome thing about them is that they are not concerned whatsoever with territory. Now this is kind of an interesting thing. See, the Age of Sigmar began when he busted open the realm gates and he started reclaiming multiple parts of different realms all over again, right? At first it was just opening the gates. That's where we had the realm gate wars. But then as we're moving into what we've learned from the Firestorm campaign expansion is like, we're resettling cities, we're redeveloping society. So there's like definite maps of areas that are secured by the good guys and the bad guys are attacking. Kind of like the old world style of like, you can make a map now, right? You could theoretically do that if you wanted to. But the Kharadron Overlords don't care about that, because the skies are everywhere, right? They can go wherever they want. They could have always gone wherever they want, and they chose not to. In a world where the pantheon of gods is fighting to reclaim land, you have these people who reject the gods, and then also at the same time reject the notion that the victory is based upon gaining ground. So not only do they have different ideology, right, they have different objectives. But not having ground works a lot of different ways, because narratively speaking, they can be wherever you want them to be, which is also really awesome, right? You don't have to come up with this massively elaborate campaign system to include, Kharadron Overlords. Like, sometimes if you're fighting in the realm of, fire, it's kind of hard to like work in Sylvaneth. You're like, I know. But these guys can be anywhere they want to be, which is really fascinating. So it gives them a lot of free range in terms of, where they can fight and things like that, but it also frees them up narratively to not have to fight at all. They can really be just about anything you want them to be, and they provide a really great counterpoint to what all the other armies are fighting for. Now, I just want to throw in there as a counterpoint. Obviously, destruction armies, generally speaking, don't care about land either, and that's true. But they do care a lot more about the people who inhabit those lands. They don't necessarily need to conquer, like I've conquered 5 continents. No one really cares, right? Orcs don't care how many continents they own. They care about who they're fighting. And so having it still makes them unique in the sense that Kharadron Overlords aren't built upon fighting anyone or covering land. They're just built upon survival. And the last thing I had written down here as far as things that make them unique is that they are a completely new type of good guy. All the good guys we've gotten so far are really identified by their deity. And we talked about this just a second ago, like how different they are because they don't worship a deity, how they projected pretty much the pantheon themselves. But in addition to that, they're still good, I would say. I mean, they're obviously an order army. I think they're generally good, but they don't have to be. They can fight in a lot of different ways based on the needs, right? Like their needs will always supersede whatever Holy Crusade Sigmar guys are doing. So if they need something, they're gonna fight Sigmar guys. It's just that simple. They'll do what they need to do. So that kind of puts them in a weird place. However, they do want order because order means business, right? You can't have business without some kind of structure and order. And that's all that they really want. So they're going to fight alongside the good guys more than they're not, but narratively speaking, it makes perfect sense for them to have clashes where resources are tight, where I don't want you to go there, I don't want you to defeat chaos in this area, because if that gets too calm, then there's no business for me to keep, supplying each side with weapons and junk like that. So there's a lot of dynamics working here. This is a very complex faction with a lot of depth to it. And that's it, guys. That's my notes on the Kharadron Overlords. Overall, I was blown away by how much I like them. I mean, honestly, I thought they were just going to be like basically a revamp of the Fire Slayers, but with more technology rather than fire themed. They wound up being an astoundingly amazing faction in the AOS universe, just because they're almost nihilist in the way that they take perceptions of the gods. I mean, obviously they believe that they exist, but they're just very pushed away from them, repulsed by them. And this idea of forging your own destiny is something that actually is fairly unique in this universe. Their emphasis on technology, even though it is still fantasy themed, much like steampunk and those kinds of things, it makes them set apart, really. And it's just a overall refreshingly new army. I wish that it had gotten a much larger response than it did when it came out. There's a lot of debate about the models. But I think when you read the book and see what they've done to represent the storyline, it makes absolute sense, and it's a beautiful model range. If you are on the fence about them or you really don't like them, take a breather through this battle tome next time you're at the store. I think it'll change your mind a little bit. They really are one of the best factions for, what you see in print put into model form. And that's going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. If you have a lore topic you would like covered, go ahead and click subscribe. Leave it in the comments down below. I read every single comment. I try to respond to as many as possible, but there's a lot of you and only one of me. I'm just getting over a terrible cold in my chest, so my voice isn't quite right, but it's getting there. Thank you guys so much for all the support and patience going through this. I look forward to doing a lot more videos in the future. Thank you so much for your time, and happy wargaming.